The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour gas station hummed their eternal dirge, casting everything in shades of sickly yellow. Chen stood behind the counter at 3:47 a.m., watching the November rain streak down the windows like tears on the face of the world. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, exhausted, 23 years old, and already carrying the weight of someone who had learned too early that hope was a luxury she could not afford. The register drawer contained exactly $47 in small bills and change. Her wallet held one crumpled dollar, her last, until Friday, 3 days away. The remainder of her paycheck had gone to her mother's dialysis, to the rent she was still 2 weeks behind on, to the medications that kept her younger brother breathing through his asthma. She had eaten half a granola bar for dinner, the other half saved for tomorrow's breakfast. This was the shape of her existence, measured in hours survived, in small kindnesses she could no longer afford to give, in the slow erosion of everything she had once believed possible for her life. The bell above the door chimed, a sound Maya had heard 10,000 times. But tonight it seemed different. Lower, somehow. More resonant, as if the air itself had grown heavier with the opening of that glass door. He stood in the entrance like something conjured from the rain and shadow, water streaming from a coat that looked older than the building, older than the highway, older perhaps than the concept of highways altogether. Tall, impossibly tall it seemed, with features that were beautiful in the way that marble statues are beautiful, cold, carved, existing outside of time. His hair was black as ink, slicked back from a face so pale it seemed to glow faintly in the fluorescent light. But it was his eyes that stopped Maya's breath in her throat. They were the color of old amber, and within them burned something that had been burning for a very, very long time. He walked toward the counter with the careful, measured steps of someone who had learned centuries ago that moving too quickly frightened the living. Maya had worked the graveyard shift for 2 years. She had seen drunks and addicts, lonely truckers, and desperate runaways. She had learned to read people the way survivors learn to read weather, watching for the storms that might break without warning. But this man defied every instinct she had developed. He was dangerous. She knew this with the same certainty she knew her own name, and yet the danger felt ancient, tired, wrapped in something that might have been sorrow. "Good evening," he said, and his voice was like the cello her mother used to play before the medical bills swallowed their piano along with everything else. Rich, deep, carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate in the hollow places of Maya's chest. "Morning, technically," she heard herself reply, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I help you find something?" Those amber eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel as though she were being read, page by page, every sentence of her tired life laid bare beneath his gaze. "I find myself lost," he said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. "I have been walking for some time. I no longer remember precisely where I intended to go." Maya noticed then what she had missed in that first startling moment of his entrance. The coat, though old, was torn at the shoulder. There was something dark staining the fabric near his ribs. Not water, something thicker. His hands, resting on the counter between them, trembled slightly with a weakness that seemed utterly at odds with everything else about him. "Are you hurt?" she asked. The ghost of a smile crossed his lips, an expression so faint and so sad that Maya felt her heart constrict. "In ways that cannot be mended with bandages, I'm afraid." He turned then to look at the meager offerings of the gas station, the racks of chips and candy, the refrigerator cases of energy drinks and soda, the rotating hot dogs that Maya knew had been spinning for at least 8 hours. "I cannot remember," he said quietly, almost to himself, "the last time I ate anything of substance." Maya watched him reach into the pocket of his coat and withdraw a handful of coins. Old coins, she noticed, worn smooth with age, some of them bearing faces she didn't recognize. He counted them slowly, as if the simple mathematics of commerce had become foreign to him. "I seem to have insufficient funds for even the smallest meal." There was no self-pity in the statement, no plea for charity. Simply a fact, delivered with the resignation of someone who had grown accustomed to the universe's indifference. Maya thought of the dollar in her wallet, her last dollar, the one that was supposed to buy her coffee tomorrow, the caffeine that would keep her awake through another double shift because she couldn't afford not to work, couldn't afford to slow down, couldn't afford anything at all. She thought of all the people who had walked through these doors and walked out again without seeing her, without acknowledging that she was anything more than an extension of the cash register. She thought of kindness as a currency she had stopped believing in, stopped receiving, stopped hoping for. And then she reached for her wallet. "Here," she said, pulling out the crumpled bill. "Take it. Get yourself something to eat." Those amber eyes fixed upon her face with something approaching shock, an expression she suspected rarely crossed features so carefully schooled to stillness. "I cannot accept this," he said. "You can. You will." Maya set the dollar on the counter between them. "I've been where you are, not knowing where you're going, not having enough to keep going anyway. Someone helped me once when I was 15 and sleeping in a shelter after my dad left. A stranger bought me dinner and told me that kindness was the only thing that made any of this bearable. I've been trying to pass it on ever since, even when I don't have much to pass." He stared at the dollar as if it were something sacred, something incomprehensible. "You do not know me," he said slowly. "You do not know what I am. I know you're hungry. I know you're alone. That's enough." The man who was not entirely a man reached out and took the dollar with fingers that trembled now, not with weakness, but with something else entirely. When he looked up at her again, there was a brightness in those ancient eyes that had not been there before, a moisture that spoke of tears that had perhaps not fallen in centuries. "You are Maya Chen," he said, and she startled, for she had not given him her name. "You work 70 hours each week to pay for your mother's treatment. You have not bought yourself new shoes in 2 years, though the ones you wear let in the rain. You gave up your scholarship to nursing school because the hospital bills would not wait, and every night you dream of the life you might have had." Fear should have filled her then, would have filled anyone else. But Maya had looked into the eyes of doctors who told her that her mother might not survive, had faced landlords who didn't care that she was only 17 and had no one left to help her. She had learned that fear was a choice, and she had made other choices. "How do you know those things?" "Because I see you," he replied, "as clearly as you chose to see me. In 200 years, no mortal has looked upon me and seen someone deserving of kindness. They see the monster, the predator, the nightmare given form. You looked at a creature of the darkness and saw a man who was hungry and alone." He drew himself up, and in that moment Maya understood that she was standing before something ancient and terrible and more powerful than anything she had imagined existing outside of dreams. "I am Valerian Blackwood," he said, "and once, in the world that was, I was called king among my kind. The vampire lords of Eastern Europe bowed their heads at my passing. I have lived for 7 centuries, and in all that vast ocean of time, I have never received a gift given with such pure intent." Maya's breath caught. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything other than stand here, heart pounding, facing the revelation that monsters were real, and one of them was standing in her gas station holding her last dollar. But she had never been very good at doing what she should. "Vampire King, huh?" she said, and her voice shook only slightly. "Explains the pale complexion." A sound escaped him, rusty, unused, but unmistakable. Valerian Blackwood, Lord of the Undead, King of the Night's Children, was laughing. "You are either very brave," he said, "or very foolish. Probably both. It's been a long night." He looked down at the dollar in his hand, then back at her face. "This gift," he said, "I cannot repay in kind. I have no mortal currency, no gold or silver that would not draw questions you should not have to answer. But I have something older than gold, something more valuable than any treasure I accumulated in 700 years of existence. If you're about to offer to turn me into a vampire, I'm going to have to pass. I barely have time to sleep as it is." Again that sound, that broken, beautiful laugh. "No, little mortal. Something else entirely." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax the color of dried blood. "When you find yourself in desperate need, true need, the kind that breaks the spirit, open this. Read what is written inside, and call my name 3 times to the darkness." Maya took the envelope with hands that trembled despite her resolve to show no fear. "And what happens then?" "Then I will come," Valerian said simply, "and I will answer your need, whatever it may be. This I swear upon the blood of my line, upon the ashes of my mortal life, upon every star that has burned out since I ceased to age. You gave me kindness when I was lost in darkness. I will give you everything in my power to give." He turned to go, moving toward the door with that same measured grace. "Wait," Maya called. "Your food. You never got anything to eat." Valerian paused at the door, looking back at her with those amber eyes that held 7 centuries of solitude. "You gave me something far more nourishing than food," he said. "You gave me proof that kindness still exists in this harsh and hurried world. That is a meal I will be savoring for decades to come." The bell chimed as he stepped out into the rain. Maya watched through the window as he walked into the darkness, his tall form gradually dissolving into the night, as if he had never been anything more than shadow and imagination. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. The wax seal bore an impression she didn't recognize. a crown above a chalice surrounded by thorns. "What the hell just happened?" she whispered to the empty store. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal answer. Nothing, nothing, nothing at all. 3 months passed. Maya did not open the envelope. She kept it hidden in the bottom of her dresser drawer, beneath the photograph of her family from before. Before her father left, before her mother got sick, before the world revealed itself to be a machine designed for the grinding down of hope. Some nights she would take it out and hold it, feeling the ancient paper crackle beneath her fingers, wondering if she had dreamed the whole encounter. But the dreams she had now were different. In them, she walked through forests that had died centuries ago, stood in ballrooms lit by candles that had burned to nothing before electricity was invented, watched wars fought with swords and arrows in lands that had changed their names so many times that even the maps had forgotten them. And always, in the distance, she saw a tall figure with amber eyes, watching her with something that might have been longing. The winter was brutal. Her mother's condition worsened. The doctors spoke of transplant lists and odds and costs that might as well have been written in the language of another planet. Maya picked up extra shifts, worked until she couldn't remember what it felt like to be fully awake, ate the minimum required to keep standing, gave everything else to the medical bills that multiplied like living things. And then February came, and with it, the accident. Black ice on the highway. A truck driver who had been awake too long, hauling too much, trying to make a deadline that wouldn't wait. Maya's mother, in the ambulance on the way to her treatment, caught in the collision like a leaf in a hurricane. Maya stood in the hospital waiting room and listened to a doctor explain that the damage was catastrophic, that the surgery required was experimental and expensive and not covered by any insurance her family could afford, that without intervention, her mother had perhaps days to live. "How much?" Maya heard herself ask. The doctor looked at her with the particular pity reserved for those who could not afford to save the people they loved. The procedure, the specialists, the recovery care, we're talking about $2 million, conservatively. $2 million. Maya laughed because the alternative was screaming. $2 million when she had $43 in her bank account, and had already sold everything worth selling, and had borrowed from everyone who would lend. She walked out of the hospital into the February night, the cold biting through her thin jacket, and she wondered how many times a heart could break before it simply stopped trying to beat. Her hand found the envelope in her pocket. She had started carrying it with her everywhere after the dreams began, though she couldn't have explained why. Now her fingers traced the wax seal with its crown and chalice and thorns, and she thought about ancient promises and vampire kings and kindness repaid. "This is insane," she said to the empty parking lot. "This is absolutely insane." But her mother was dying, and insane was all she had left. She broke the seal with shaking fingers and pulled out a single piece of parchment covered in handwriting that belonged to another century, elegant and flowing and somehow sad. "To the mortal who showed kindness to the lost king," she read aloud, her breath misting in the cold air. "When darkness threatens to consume all light, speak my name to the night, and I shall answer. For in 700 years of existence no gift has touched me so deeply as $1 given freely by a woman who had nothing else to give. Whatever you ask, if it is in my power, it shall be yours. This is the oath of Valerian Blackwood, and my oaths do not break." Maya looked up at the sky, at the stars that burned cold and distant above the hospital parking lot, and she felt foolish and desperate and completely without alternatives. "Valerian Blackwood," she whispered. "Valerian Blackwood. Valerian Blackwood." For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind blew. The cold seeped deeper into her bones. Somewhere in the hospital behind her, her mother lay dying. And then the shadows moved. He stepped out of the darkness between streetlights as if darkness were a door, and he its keeper. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, pale, beautiful in that terrible ancient way. But there was something different in his bearing now. He stood straighter. His eyes burned brighter. The weakness she had seen that night in the gas station was gone, replaced by a vitality that made the very air around him seem to hum with power. "Maya Chen," he said, and her name in his voice was like a prayer, like a promise, like the tolling of a bell that had been silent for centuries. "You called." "My mother," she said, and her voice broke on the words, all her strength finally crumbling. "She's dying. There was an accident, and she needs surgery, and it costs more money than I'll make in 10 lifetimes, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to save her. I've never known how to save anyone." She was crying now, tears freezing on her cheeks, and she felt Valerian's cold hand against her face, gentle as snow, wiping away the evidence of her despair. "Hush," he said, soft as midnight. "Tell me what is needed. $2 million. That's what they said. $2 million or she dies." Valerian nodded, as if this sum were nothing, as if $2 million were a trifle barely worth mentioning. "Come with me," he said, and offered her his hand. "There are things I must show you, things you must understand before the night is done." Maya hesitated. Every survival instinct she had developed screamed at her not to take this creature's hand, not to follow him into the shadows he commanded. But her mother was dying, and instinct was a luxury she could not afford. She took his hand. The world blurred around them, reality becoming suggestion, solid ground transforming into something more like memory. Maya felt herself moving faster than cars, faster than thought, through darkness that wrapped around them like velvet, like mercy, like the space between heartbeats. When the world stabilized again, they stood in a room she did not recognize. It was vast, a library perhaps, though the word seemed inadequate. Bookshelves stretched toward ceilings lost in shadow, filled with volumes bound in leather and cloth and materials she couldn't name. Candles burned in sconces along the walls, their flames never flickering, casting warm light over furnishings that looked like they belonged in a museum. Through tall windows, Maya could see a garden wrapped in night, ancient trees standing sentinel over paths that wound into darkness. "This is my home," Valerian said, releasing her hand with what seemed like reluctance. "Or rather, one of them. The one I return to when the world becomes too loud, too fast, too full of noise that never ceases." "It's beautiful," Maya whispered, because it was, haunting and melancholy and beautiful in the way that loss is beautiful, in the way that memory is beautiful. "It is lonely," Valerian corrected gently. "As I have been lonely for 7 centuries, as I believed I would be lonely until the sun finally grew brave enough to claim me." He turned to face her, those amber eyes holding hers with an intensity that should have frightened her. "And then a cashier in a gas station gave me her last dollar, and I remembered that the world was not entirely without grace." He moved to a desk covered in papers and books, and the detritus of an existence spent trying to fill infinite hours. From a drawer, he withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols Maya didn't recognize. $2 million, he said, setting the box before her. "This is what you need to save your mother's life." Maya opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay currency, bills and papers and documents that her eyes struggled to process. Stock certificates, her mind supplied. Bonds, deeds to properties she'd never heard of. Bank account information for institutions that sounded more like countries than businesses. "I have had 700 years to accumulate wealth," Valerian said quietly. 700 years with nothing to spend it on, no one to share it with, no purpose beyond the endless pursuit of more empty time. The contents of that box represent perhaps 1/10 of what I have gathered. Take it. Save your mother. Build the life you were meant to live. Maya's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the box. "I can't," she whispered. This is everything. I gave you $1. "You gave me hope," Valerian replied. "In 7 centuries of darkness, you gave me proof that humanity was worth remembering, worth protecting, worth continuing to walk among. What price would you put on that?" He reached out and closed her hands around the box, his cold fingers gentle against her warm ones. "Your mother requires a surgery that costs $2 million. The remainder will pay off your debts, fund your education, ensure that you never again have to choose between your own survival and the survival of those you love. This is not charity, Maya Chen. This is repayment. This is a king honoring a debt that no amount of gold could ever fully satisfy." Maya stared at him through tears that blurred the candlelight into halos, into stars, into the kind of light she had stopped believing existed. "Why?" she asked. "Why does it matter so much? $1, one stupid dollar from a stranger." Valerian was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Because in all my years of existence, no one has ever seen me as you did. To the world, I am monster or myth, predator or impossibility. But you looked at me and saw a man who was hungry and alone. You saw past the darkness to something that was still capable of receiving. Kindness." He reached up and touched her cheek again, and Maya could feel the cold of him, the ancient stillness of a body that had not truly lived in 700 years. "You saw me, and in being seen, I was reminded that I am more than the thing I became." Maya thought of her mother, alone in that hospital bed, thought of her brother, struggling to breathe, thought of all the people she had tried to help over the years, with nothing to offer but her presence and her care. "The money alone won't save her," she said slowly. The doctors said it was experimental, said even with the surgery she might not. Then the doctors will have help, Valerian said. I have spent 7 centuries learning things that mortal medicine has forgotten or never knew. I cannot heal her myself. The sun's curse prevents me from entering places where the sick gather, too much pain, too much blood. But I know those who can. Doctors who practice in shadows, surgeons who have refined their craft over centuries. They will come because I ask. They will save your mother because I will make it clear that her death would displease me greatly. He smiled then, and for a moment Maya saw something ancient and terrifying flash behind those amber eyes. The king he had been, the power he still commanded. Vampires are not the only supernatural beings who walk this world, he continued, and even those who do not fear death fear the loss of my patronage. Your mother will have the best care that eternity can provide. Maya set the box down on the desk and turned to face him fully. What do you get out of this? She asked. What do you want from me? The question seemed to wound him in a way that no weapon ever could. I want nothing, he said quietly. I expect nothing. If you walk out of this house tonight and never speak to me again, I will still consider the debt paid, because I will know that somewhere in the world, a kind woman lives the life she deserves. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. But if you ask me what I hope for, I would say that I hope you might sometimes remember me, that you might occasionally think of the vampire in the gas station who was given kindness he did not deserve, that perhaps, someday, you might even consider me a friend. Maya looked at this creature of darkness and shadow, this being who had lived 700 years and killed more people than she could imagine and accumulated more wealth than small nations, and she saw what she had seen that first night in the gas station. A man who was desperately, unbearably alone. Come to the hospital with me, she said. Valerian blinked, surprise breaking through his carefully maintained composure. I told you, I cannot enter. You can't enter the building, I know, but you can wait outside. You can be there when I come out. You can meet my mother when she's better, properly I mean, not as a vampire king, just as my friend, the one who helped save her life. For a long moment, Valerian said nothing. The candles flickered, somewhere in the vast house, a clock that had been counting hours since the Renaissance struck midnight. You would want that? He asked, and his voice was strange, rough, as if the words themselves were unfamiliar. You would want me to be part of your life, knowing what I am? I know what you are, Maya said. You're someone who was lost and found kindness and has spent months waiting for a chance to repay it. That's not a monster. That's just someone who needed to believe that good things could still happen. She reached out and took his cold hand in her warm one. Good things can still happen. For both of us. But only if we're brave enough to let them. Valerian looked down at their joined hands, and Maya saw something glittering on his cheek. A single drop of red. The only tears his kind could shed. It has been so long, he whispered, since I have believed that. Then let me show you, Maya said. Let me prove it. Help me save my mother, and then let me show you what it's like to have someone who sees you. Not the king, not the monster, not the vampire, just you. The clock finished striking midnight. Outside the windows, the ancient garden held its breath, and Valerian Blackwood, who had not wept in 300 years, pulled Maya Chen into an embrace and held her as if she were the only warm thing left in an endless frozen universe. The surgery was a success. Maya's mother woke 3 days later to find her daughter sleeping in the chair beside her bed. Dark circles under her eyes, but a peace on her face that had not been there in years. The bills had been paid, all of them, every outstanding balance, every threatening letter, every debt that had accumulated since Maya's father walked out and left them drowning. What happened? Her mother whispered. Maya, how? Maya opened her eyes and smiled, and there was something different in that smile, something older and sadder and infinitely more hopeful than anything her mother had seen before. Someone repaid a kindness, she said simply. Someone I gave $1 to once. Her mother stared at her, questions forming behind her eyes, but Maya just squeezed her hand and let the silence speak for itself. Outside the hospital window, as the evening shadows lengthened into night, a tall figure stood among the trees at the edge of the parking lot. He watched the light in Maya's window with ancient eyes, and if the night nurses had looked closely, they might have seen something impossible. A man who cast no shadow, standing perfectly still, a small smile on his lips. He had sent the surgeons, vampires themselves, ancient ones who had been practicing medicine since before anesthesia was invented. He had paid the bills with money that had been gathering dust in vaults older than the hospital. He had done everything in his power to ensure that Maya Chen never again had to choose between her own survival and the people she loved. But the greatest gift he was discovering was this: standing in the shadows and watching someone else's happiness, knowing that he had played some small part in making it possible. For 700 years, Valerian Blackwood had taken from the world blood and life and time, an endless consumption that had filled his belly but never touched the hollow place where his soul had once resided. Maya Chen had taught him something he had forgotten, something so simple and so profound that it had broken through centuries of callous accumulation. The only thing worth keeping was the things you gave away. Spring came. Maya returned to school. Nursing school, finally. The dream she had deferred for so long. The scholarship had been mysteriously reinstated, along with an anonymous grant that covered her living expenses. She suspected she knew who was responsible, but when she asked Valerian about it on one of their midnight walks through his garden, he simply smiled and changed the subject. They had become, against all odds and expectations, something like friends. He would appear at her window on nights when she couldn't sleep, and they would walk through the darkness together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of the centuries he had witnessed, the rise and fall of empires, the wars fought over beliefs that humanity had long since forgotten, the slow transformation of the world from something wild and magical into something ordered and mechanical and loud. She told him about her father's abandonment, about the nights she had spent in homeless shelters, about the small kindnesses that had kept her alive when everything in her wanted to give up. She told him about her brother, now breathing easily with medication paid for and a room of his own. She told him about her mother, growing stronger every day, laughing again for the first time in years. "You've done so much for us," Maya said one night, as they sat on a bench overlooking a moonlit pond. "I don't know how to ever repay you." "You repay me every moment you spend in my company," Valerian replied. "Every smile, every story, every glimpse of a life being lived fully and without fear. This is the currency I hunger for now, Maya Chen. Not gold, not blood, simply this." She leaned her head against his shoulder, no longer startled by the coldness of his body, by the stillness of a chest that did not breathe. "What happens when I get old?" she asked softly. "When I die?" It was a question that had hung between them unspoken, growing heavier with each passing week. Valerian was quiet for a long time. "I have considered this," he finally admitted. "I have considered it constantly, in truth. The thought of watching you age, watching you wither, watching you slip away as every mortal I have ever cared for has slipped away." He turned to look at her, and his amber eyes held something she had never seen in them before: fear. "I do not think I could bear it. So you'd want me to become like you? I would never ask that of you. The curse I carry, the things I have done to survive. You deserve better than this existence, Maya. You deserve sunlight and warmth, and a life measured in the way human lives should be measured." Maya was quiet, considering. "What if it wasn't a curse?" she asked. "What if it was a choice? What if I chose to stay with you, not because you asked, but because I wanted to?" Valerian's stillness became absolute, even the pretense of breath ceasing. "You would choose an eternity of darkness, an eternity of thirst, an eternity of watching the world change around you while you remain forever frozen?" "I would choose an eternity of not being alone," Maya said simply. "I would choose an eternity of midnight walks and ancient stories, and someone who sees me, really sees me, the way no one else ever has." She turned to face him fully, taking his cold hands in her warm ones. "You showed me that kindness can change everything. Let me show you that you don't have to be alone anymore." "Maya," his voice broke on her name, "you don't know what you're asking. The turning is agony, the hunger is endless, the guilt—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I know all of it, Valerian. You've told me everything, shown me everything. You've spent months trying to convince me that you're a monster, and all you've managed to prove is that you're the loneliest person I've ever met." She reached up and touched his face, her warm fingers tracing the cold marble of his cheek. "I'm not afraid of what you are. I'm afraid of a world where you're all alone again, fading into the shadows with no one to remind you that kindness still exists." For the second time since Maya had known him, Valerian Blackwood wept. Red tears traced paths down his pale cheeks, and when he pulled her into his arms, she could feel him shaking with the force of emotions that had been dammed up for centuries. "I cannot ask you for this," he whispered against her hair. "I cannot be responsible for taking your life from you." "You're not taking anything," Maya said. "I'm giving it, freely. The way I gave you that $1 in the gas station, Not because you asked, not because I expected anything in return, but because kindness is the only thing that makes any of this bearable." She pulled back to look at him, and her smile was the smile of someone who had finally found the thing they had been searching for without knowing it. "You said you wanted to repay me 1,000,000 times over for one act of kindness. Here's your chance. Give me forever, Valerian. Give me an eternity to show you what it's like to be loved." The moon hung full and heavy above the garden. The ancient trees whispered their approval in a language older than either of them. And Valerian Blackwood, king of the vampires, lord of the night, 700 years of solitude and shadow, made his choice. "Then let it be done," he said, "in the old way. Let it be done with love, and choice and full knowledge of what is to come." He tilted her chin up, exposing the soft vulnerability of her throat. "You are certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He kissed her then, soft and cold and full of something that felt like salvation. And when his fangs found her throat, Maya Chen closed her eyes and felt the world she had known slipping away, replaced by something darker and older and infinitely more vast. The pain was transcendent. The darkness was absolute, but through it all, she held on to one thing: the knowledge that she was not alone, that she would never be alone again, that kindness had finally been repaid. When she woke, the world was different. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer, and the darkness that had always frightened her now felt like coming home. She lay in a bed she didn't recognize, in a room lit by candles, and Valerian sat beside her with her hand in his, watching her with those ancient amber eyes. "How do you feel?" he asked, and his voice carried a tremor of uncertainty, of fear. Maya considered the question carefully. She could feel the hunger he had warned her about, a burning need in her throat that demanded satisfaction. She could feel the strangeness of a body that no longer breathed, a heart that no longer beat, a life that had become something else entirely. But she could also feel him, his presence, his proximity, the invisible thread that now connected them across any distance. "I feel like myself," she said finally. "A different version of myself, maybe, but still me." She squeezed his hand. "Still someone who believes in kindness." Relief washed across his features, followed by something that looked remarkably like joy. "The hunger," he said carefully. "It will be difficult at first. There are things you must learn, rules you must follow. I will teach you everything, help you through everything. You need never face this alone." "I know." Maya sat up slowly, testing her new body's responses. "And when I'm ready, when I've learned enough, I want to keep helping people. I want to use what I've become to make things better, not worse." Valerian smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had just watched the impossible become possible. "I would expect nothing less from the woman who gave away her last dollar to a stranger." Maya laughed, and the sound was different now, richer, deeper, carrying echoes of eternity. But it was still her laugh, still full of warmth and hope and the stubborn belief that kindness mattered. "Come on," she said, rising from the bed with a grace she had never possessed in her mortal life. "The night is young, and there's a world out there full of people who could use a little kindness." "And we have forever to give it," Valerian replied, taking her hand. They walked out of the ancient house together, two figures dissolving into the darkness, moving through shadows that parted before them like curtains. Above them, the stars, burned cold and eternal, indifferent to the small dramas of the earth below. But Maya and Valerian were not indifferent. They were immortal now, both of them, bound by choice and blood, and something that transcended both. And they would spend their endless nights proving what Maya had always believed. That kindness was the only currency that truly mattered. That compassion could break any curse. That love, freely given, was worth more than all the gold in all the vaults of all the vampire kings who had ever walked the night. In a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of nowhere, a new cashier worked the graveyard shift. She was young and tired and carrying burdens too heavy for her shoulders. The register drawer contained $43. Her wallet held her last $5. When the bell chimed at 3:47 a.m. and a shivering homeless woman stumbled through the door, the cashier thought about saving that money, thought about all the things she needed, all the bills that waited. And then she remembered a story her grandmother had told her about a woman who had once given her last dollar to a stranger who turned out to be a vampire king, about kindness repaid 1,000,000 times over. "Here," the cashier said, pressing the $5 into the homeless woman's hand. "Get yourself something warm to eat." Across town, in shadows that no mortal eye could penetrate, Maya Chen smiled. She felt the ripple of kindness moving through the world, felt it like a heartbeat, the one she no longer possessed, the one that still somehow guided her. Another one, she murmured to the darkness beside her. Yes, Valerian agreed, his amber eyes bright with pride. The kindness spreads. They watched from the shadows as the homeless woman wept with gratitude, as the cashier smiled the smile of someone who had just remembered what truly mattered. And then they moved on, two ancient beings walking through a modern world, leaving kindness in their wake like stars leaving light in the darkness. Some debts Maya had learned could never fully be repaid. But you could spend eternity trying, and that, in the end, was enough.